One of the things that we've learned from the stroke telemedicine service is the importance of the stroke nurses, actually, in that they've got to be educated and trained to be able to deliver the expert care the consultant is asking them to do. So in any telemedicine setup, unless the clinicians locally can deliver the care that's been recommended by your remote expert, it's pointless having a telemedicine system, because if they can't deliver the care that's being asked of them, it's pointless really. You may as well put the patient in an ambulance to the next hospital that can deal with it, which is what happened previously. So one of the things that's come out of the stroke telemedicine service is the importance of education and training, and we've appointed one of our stroke consultants as our education lead, and he's got a background in medical education. And with the cardiac and the stroke networks disappearing across the east of England, we've had no structure at all for training and education at all for nurses in stroke. So we've actually taken on that role ourselves as part of the service to be able to deliver what we call masterclasses on assessment, etc., for the stroke nurses. Now, paramedics now have largely an educational degree approach to their preparation for paramedic practice, which is relatively new in the UK, and they're now recognised as a profession in their own right. So whilst they're used to treating stroke patients and their assessments of acutely ill patients is very good, being able to decipher between what we call big sick and little sick, so patients that have got, patients that have generally got a straightforward stroke or relatively easy, those strokes that have got mimics, whilst they're taught the education of that in university, and I know that from first hand, actually putting some of that into practice and making assessment, a neurological assessment of a patient who doesn't fit the stroke presentation actually means that paramedics will defer to the path of the safest care, and they will take the patient to hospital. Even when, if you talk to the paramedics, they will say, actually, don't think they really needed to go to A&E, but kind of, I just wanted to be safe. So we're kind of helping to support the paramedic development. So one of the things we wanted to do is to ensure that the paramedics, whilst they're highly trained and educated and they're aware of what they're doing, is to give them some specific, what we call hyperacute stroke training. And there are a number of courses out there that we looked at, and we've kind of distilled the best bits from the research and from the other providers. And we developed initially a 3-day hyperacute training program for the paramedics prior to undertaking this pilot. With the capacity issues, what we've done is negotiated now with the ambulance service that 3 days will now become 1 day, because that's the only backfill cost that we can support to be able to release those paramedics for 1 day of their education. Senior clinical engagement when you're trying to do anything with telemedicine is really important, and if you can get consultants on board early on in this project, which is what happened, and we've got the senior paramedic lead, the stroke in the area on board, who we link with anyway because of the stroke out of hours services, we liaise with the ambulance service. That's really key, because the less you can get those people on board to be able to help this process get up and running, it's quite a strict sort of structure, I guess, and a lot of these areas are siloed very much, and that they don't always communicate with each other that well. So to be able to develop that sort of pre-hospital to secondary care link, you're sort of jumping over primary care, is actually quite useful. So engagement from everybody at the beginning, from our education advisor to the IT people, has been really supportive, and IACON, the company that make the software, have offered us the support of O2, for example, because we know bandwidth is going to be an issue, as it is across this region. It can be quite difficult. So engagement has been really important, and that happened at the very beginning. Preparation time, whilst it's taken longer, has allowed us to reflect on what we're looking at, and have allowed us to do the research, because that all takes time. And I think it's like in the NHS, you always plan for 3 times longer than it should do, because that's just how long things take to get up and running. It's just the nature of the beast. But it has allowed us time to look at the IT issues, to test some equipment out. We need to see what the paramedics think of it, obviously, but it's allowed us to play around with things, set up audit forms. We can adapt those. So yes, it's time is important. Start with something quite small rather than taking on a great big project, because it's always going to fall over and fail. So start really small, because you can always grow. Start networking, see if anyone else has done the same thing, because you might learn an awful lot from other people and, you know, mistakes that they've made or barriers that they've come across or issues that they've come across that you haven't even thought of. So I think being able to network with other people, and certainly part of this Digital Pioneer has been really useful to see, whilst there have been different projects, actually, they often have a similar theme to yourselves, like barriers, you know, middle management, whatever, people actually using it. And it's also about training and education. I think, you know, people often think, oh my goodness me, it's all, you know, you've got to press lots of buttons. And I think if you can make it very easy, which our software is, it's actually very easy to use. I mean, you saw me earlier, it's literally 2 clicks and you're in. Then people are much happier with it. And I think we're in a generation of healthcare professionals who are kind of familiar with, and they might do online banking, but they're kind of just not quite sure, and particularly if the service themselves doesn't use many IT or electronic notes, it can be quite difficult. So it's about making sure that you've prepared the people in advance, that they're aware of it, and also ongoing support. Unless you've got someone there to support the project ongoing, you just disappear after a while, it will fold. If there's no one dedicated to keep that project moving forward to a service, it won't happen unless you've got a dedicated individual to keep moving it.
So you talked earlier about measuring and the evidence of the need for change. So just tell us a little bit about what you're proposing to help these sorts of projects in terms of the future from the research.
Yeah, so one of the things we're looking at is, for our particular Digital Pioneer project, does it improve diagnostic acuity? So do we actually improve our diagnosis of these patients earlier in the pathway? So do we make a difference at the end of the day? Do we prevent patients going to the emergency department? From a hospital perspective, they always have too many patients. And also from an ambulance perspective, they're also wanting to reduce the number of patients that they're having to transfer to the emergency department. If we can measure that, what they can do instead of sending out a full ambulance to some patients is actually just send out what we call a rapid response vehicle, which often has a senior advanced paramedic in it who have extended education and training, so that you can release your full paramedic ambulance to go to maybe a road traffic collision where they're really needed. So it's about deploying your resources more effectively. You can stand them down much earlier in the care that you're giving to a patient than you can do otherwise. And there are a lot of paramedics out there who are very interested in the primary care pathway. Some of them you find either very critical and they like the helicopter stuff, or the very primary care orientated, and it tends to attract the more primary care orientated who are very interested in actually how does this, you know, where do we refer this patient other than hospital, and lots of other routes that we can refer them to. So there's a number of elements. Diagnostic acuity is one of them. We're looking at how the patients receive this. We're probably going to do a fairly simple patient questionnaire for that, how the patients perceive this. We're conscious of the time spent on scene, and that's probably something else we'll measure in terms of the scene time. We can look at that post and pre-implementation of this, because paramedics need to be released as quickly as possible for their next case, but we need to, you know, is that quality of care being delivered within a certain amount of time. So there's a number of factors that we're looking at. Well, we've already been approached by the paramedics in the North Norfolk, where they have quite long transfer time, so about using this particular service for stroke in North Norfolk, which is quite interesting. There are other elements of stroke care that are coming on. So I'm thinking of thrombectomy, which is the mechanical removal of a blood clot, with telemedicine involved in that. Outside stroke, we are already working with the acute neonatal transfer service, or the ANT service based here, that retrieve poorly neonatal babies, early babies that are brought to Rosie Hospital for care. So we're working with them at the moment on a larger IT project, looking at putting in telemedicine to all the neonatal units. So it's going to be a sort of virtual triage, because some of the babies that are brought here, they're separated from their mothers. When they don't need to be, the care could actually be delivered locally.
Stage your scheme. Do small steps and get each step working before you move to the next step. And maybe run a pilot or a test scheme first. Try it small, then expand as you go. Once you've got the formula that works.
The fact that we've been able to provide a better work-life balance for our clinicians by enabling this project. It was amazing once we'd done some data on that, how many people actually spend their own time writing up clinical notes, whereas this has enabled them not to do that.
And again, the clinicians who are using it feel that they make a much more informed judgment because they can see all of the information about the patient in front of them, so they know what's going on with that patient, so they're not having to duplicate referrals or worry about whether the results they've got in front of them are or aren't normal for the patient. So again, they can be a lot more focused with the care and intervention they give to that patient.
What we've learned through, especially through communications, is we need to do it in multitude of mediums. So we have done promotional videos from clinicians actually telling other clinicians what works well, what are the benefits, and how they actually work. But also through stories, different stories from clinicians, articles, and just communication through mediums. Meetings, and video conferencing.
And then also relying on our clinicians who are working in a mobile way, who are finding it useful to have a ripple effect through the rest of the clinicians who they work with. So we're also establishing a clinical champions group. So those who work in a mobile way, they feel really comfortable with it, they're passionate, they can see the difference, so they can support their team, their friends who they work with to take on a new way of working. That's also been really important and positive. And then on top of that, we as a team are just continuing to engage. So we do our one-to-one support visits, but we then support our staff after that again. We make sure they're happy. And the fact that we're constantly going out to these different environments, these different teams to carry on training other people means they're always seeing us, they always feel that there's that support there. So they get that support in lots of ways rather than just feeling like it's a random email once in a while, and it's a genuine, how are you getting on, what can we do to support you, what can we do to make it better.
I think make access to data easy, then people are more inclined to use it and learn from it. So we've established our own internal website for the mobile app where we can share information, where people can access information at their leisure, because people don't always have the time to read emails, or when you email somebody they may not pick it up for a couple of hours or maybe days, and they may not be able to attend meetings. So whereas we've tried to cover as many aspects as we can, but also enable clinicians to have access to that information when they need it. The main factors that we've had is through many different channels. So we've engaged with senior management up front, but also local management, to making sure that we, as a project team, including our team, are a face for the project itself. We introduced a cohort of people, operational managers, very early on within the project to help steer, guide and influence this project, to make sure that we had clinical availability up front, but also clinical buy-in from the onset of this project. And it's been a massive driver initially.
And what was really important with that was that when we worked out what our training programme was going to be, we could ensure that we were disrupting service minimally, but making a maximum impact for our clinicians.
For us, I think it's creating what we class as creating the urgency for change. So understanding what technologies will help earlier, and not just clinicians being the driver for that, the whole trust being the driver for what can actually help us take us to the next step. And then gathering information on kind of how we work in terms of practice and identifying any kind of pitfalls initially, rather than doing it throughout the project. I think it's doing that investigatory piece to start with.
Yeah, not relying on presumptions that have already been made around working practice.
Yeah.
There was a presumption that more people were working in a mobile way than they actually were when we started.
We done some measurements throughout the project to make sure that we weren't elongating the process for clinicians. I think we could have done more of that up front to help create more of a business case for change. Effectively making sure that we don't add another hour or two on to the end of the clinician's day. Through this project we've actually reduced that, but to have that evidence up front would have been a great selling point.
Looked at the policies to support our staff, but if we'd have done that earlier and helped put that as part of the reinforcement of the change, that actually we have a policy that says this is how we expect our staff to work, that would have, again, helped set expectations, given a bit more of a urgency to why we're changing, because we have a policy that says this is how we should be working.